Our next speaker is Maxine Reigel. She broke the glass ceiling years ago as one of the first women Boilermakers on the docks, the shipyards, I guess. It's really not the docks, the shipyards, different. Also one of the first women on the Martin Luther King County Labor Council. She went on to become a leader in New York City Hotel Workers Union, organizing co-workers for rank and file democracy, and participated on negotiating committees there in a very volatile union city, especially for restaurant workers. Now she's an accountant by trade for the county, but she's a proud Teamster and a member of the steering committee for Organized Workers for Labor Solidarity. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Wow, what a panel tonight, right? There's no doubt about the insurgency of labor. I've spent the majority of my working life as a waitress, so I have been absolutely thrilled to see the walkouts of fast food workers across the country, and people like Carlos are the heroes to me, and so many restaurant workers. And the fast food workers are demanding not just an increase in wages, not just $15, but the respect that's due a profession as basic and as critical to human life as food. The strikes have highlighted the super exploitation of a really sometimes invisible workforce. It's made up of women, of immigrants, of young, old, gay, trans folks, and others. And this invisible workforce in this year will turn sales of $660 billion for the restaurant industry. The fast food workers, it's not just a mom and pop thing, and fast food workers are being joined by many others across labor that are walking out. We've seen taxi drivers, we've seen short-haul truckers go out, we've seen the berry workers at Sakuma going out on strike, we've seen home health care workers, and across the country people are walking out. I think that the current fast food strikes have once again popularized the idea of going out on strike. That's right. And striking to protest working conditions, strikes for union recognition, strikes to settle grievances, and strikes to secure contracts. Walking off the job is again seen as a powerful and a legitimate tactic for working people, even those without a union. And my hope is that this becomes very contagious. Today's insurgency, I think, really draws on the May Day strikes that were led by immigrants in 2006 and 2007. And those strikes, as we remember, shut down the entire meatpacking industry across the country, construction sites, most of Los Angeles, and many other cities. And the May Day strikes exposed the conditions of undocumented immigrant workers and the multi-billion-dollar expansion of Homeland Security Department. And they raised the demands for immediate amnesty, a halt to pending really awful guest worker legislation at the time, the right to organize, and open borders. And those demands were taken up by portions of the labor movement at that point. Many of the current campaigns, such as the fast food and the Walmart organizing, have been initiated by unions and supported by community organizations, NGOs, religious groups, liberal elected politicians that have been offering support to, as they say, grow the middle-class jobs with marches, publicity, and pushing for legal remedies to protect working people. But for me, the real core of this battle is the brave and really brilliant people, the working people who are organizing on their jobs with their co-workers and formulating demands, hammering out agreements, and learning to work together with a common strategy and supporting each other. And we're seeing that the fight of the most oppressed and the most exploited are leading in all of these battles across the country. And they're leading and turning around, I think, the tide of declining wages, the decline in unionization, and the decline of just the fight-back spirit that we need so much today. They are a challenge to the economic and political system that's really designed, as we have seen, to benefit only that 1%. I think we in the U.S. labor movement, as others have talked about, are part of also an international climate change. And it's a climate change within the working class really heating up as the capitalist economy and the crisis therein, and the bosses' reactions with cutting social services, downsizing, lowering wages. But this time the bosses are meeting with some hot resistance. I think right now we're at a really critical point in labor, and we have an opportunity to build a class-conscious, independent, and democratic labor movement that will really stand up and do the job that needs to be done. Jason talked about the recent AFL-CIO convention, and I think it was the convention and the turning outward has been an illustration of the unrest and pressure from below, pushing on the leadership of labor to open up and represent our entire class. Resolutions passed at that convention finally lifting the gag order on abortion and women's right to reproductive freedom. There is a part for transgender rights. They raised resolutions for organizing in the South, and there was also discussion over immigration. But what we've seen with the AFL-CIO and other union leadership is sometimes the resolutions that are passed look a little better on paper than they do in action. And I think that's something that we need to really push on in the upcoming period. But there was good discussion at the convention, and discussion about broadening the labor movement and having it really represent all workers. I think one of the fundamental problems, or one of the glaring examples out of that convention, however, was that they did not discuss the need for a labor party, and there was no mention of the impending war and wars that we have been in and are going into. The leadership that's coming up and pushing the top to come up with better resolutions, I think, is an example of rank and file and community activists who are out fighting daily for the kind of labor movement that we want. At the convention in Los Angeles, there were members of the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women and several other community groups that got together and put out a leaflet calling for real immigration reform, going back to amnesty, open borders, rights for workers wherever you're from. And they handed those flyers out outside of the convention while the delegates at the convention passed a much more regressive resolution on comprehensive reform package, which I think the pathway to citizenship looks kind of like the pathway to the top of Mount Everest. So the backsliding that they have come up, that we see, is really, it's being answered, I believe, in many areas, and it's being answered by people from the bottom pushing once again, people from outside the labor movement pushing, and people like the fast food workers who have gone out on strike with or without a union. So how could we maintain this upsurge? Because we've seen upsurges before, and we need to maintain a movement that is capable of really changing our lives and changing the society. I think our job is to build a militant, anti-capitalist, multiracial labor movement with a radical working class program, and that will fight against all forms of discrimination. It will tolerate different viewpoints, and it will defend any group that is oppressed. I think in the labor movement that we need, program is what's going to be the foundation, and a program that defends the most oppressed and also addresses the divisions within the labor movement along the lines of race, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, immigration status, and relative privilege within the labor movement. A radical program wouldn't support lesser evil candidates. It wouldn't give help to the corporations to maintain their profit margins. It wouldn't make nice negotiations with win-win settlements where the management wins and we settle. It would be based on the old standard of an injury to one is an injury to all, and it would recognize that the working class and the ranks of labor are international and that we make everything in society while the 1% profits. A couple of ideas of program that labor movement might have is, how about putting forth a massive public works program that would be funded by taxes on corporations, an education program that could be funded by stopping the war, and that's just a start. I think a first step to make this an effective movement is political independence, and we've talked about, Kshama has talked about the need for political independence tonight as socialist candidates, and the labor movement has yet to learn that lesson. We need an absolute 100% break with the parties and the politicians that do the boss's bidding. Labor has lobbied and been funding and been doorbelling elected officials for decades, and the only thing we get is more restrictions, as Jason was saying, on what we can and cannot do. We've been robbed, and it's time for the labor leaders to resign from that old boys club and toss out that Kool-Aid and build a labor party with a radical program and an independent program. We have no national labor party at this point that represents working people and the poor. And that's why the Freedom Socialist Party ran a write-in campaign for president in the last election, with Stephen Durham running for president and Christina Lopez vice president. It was an exciting campaign, and it's really positive to have somebody to vote for instead of just say, don't support the Democrats. How about do write in a socialist? Or let's do write in a Labor Party. And that's also why we in the Freedom Socialist Party are supporting Kshama's bid for city council. We absolutely have to have independent politics in the labor movement. And that's also why we've helped with, there's a lot of us who are in unions, and we've helped by taking that message to our unions and asking our unions to support Kshama. We asked our unions to support our own presidential campaign, but to break with those crooks that we have been funding for so long. I think an effective labor movement also needs to be a movement that's based on democracy. Fighting for union democracy is a really huge battle today. Many of us are in unions that have no meetings. There's no discussion. If we have meetings, we can't make motions. And the union membership really has nothing to say about what decisions are made at the top. We need to be able to discuss, decide, debate, differ, and come up with a strategy that we who are putting our jobs on the line, like Carlos, can carry out. And we call our employees, that's the labor leadership, to task to carry out their job. Doreen mentioned that I had worked as a waitress, and I always say waitress instead of food server. I guess it's old school, but anyway, at Windows on the World in New York, and I learned a lot working there. It was a very international workforce, and it was one of the top grossing restaurants in the world. In fancy restaurants, there's a division between workers that is all but cast in concrete. There are the front of the house people who tend to be quite white. In this establishment, the front of the house or the head bartender that served the businessmen was a white man who'd been there for many, many years, serving his 200 brands of scotch to the captains of industry, who would no more talk to the Haitian immigrants working in the dish pit than he would fly to the moon. However, during the organizing that we went through, our contract was coming up. We thought we'd never seen it before. And we started talking about what we wanted as workers. We decided that we needed to stick together, everyone from the front bar to the dish pit to the Puerto Rican bakers that were working in the 5th basement of the World Trade Center, to the white banquet workers, stood together and came up with some demands that we wanted in our contract. We called for the people on the bottom to get higher wages. We called for management to quit harassing us. We called for affirmative action on the job so that we could break the race and gender lines between the lower paying and higher paying jobs. And we called for an elected negotiating committee. I think we took the union by surprise because we actually got all of that in the negotiations. We didn't get it all from the restaurant, but what I learned in that battle is when you have a program that really addresses the whole workforce and is particularly strong around the most oppressed, that the divisions within that house fell away almost immediately. We had a report back from a negotiating committee that I thought was going to be kind of a small meeting no one would come to, and someone reserved a room at the restaurant, and all of a sudden 400 workers showed up. That was the last meeting they let us have on site, but 400 workers showed up, and we joined arms, and we defeated that contract 100%. So what we got was a better contract, some democracy on our union, and most of all, solidarity on the floor that the management could never quite cut through again. I think that the labor movement that we need, that I would really like to see, will look very much like the one that we talked about last month when the Sakuma workers were here describing their organizing on the berry farms. And They organized by everyone meeting together, coming up with the demands, and not just stopped at the price of berries, but there were demands that incorporated those of better working conditions and wages, also respect, non-discrimination, sanitation in the living quarters, child care, and addressed the double workload of women workers in the field and in the home. That's what we need. So I think the 4 points that I've put forth, and I'd like to hear what people think, in building a strong labor movement that can really pull together our class and fight back this tide, is we need to have a movement that represents the most oppressed. It needs to be an international movement that sees a link between workers here and workers internationally, and that we are brothers and sisters of one class. We need to have absolute political independence from the boss's parties and union democracy. Our movement, the labor movement, was founded on an injury to one is an injury to all, and that we want to raise the whole working class. The only way to change, and I think that's the only way we can really change the economic system that we live under that's based on profit. Rather, to build one that's based on shared resources, mutual solidarity and respect, and where we produce what we use according to a reasonable plan that's thought out and without one brain cell going towards the question of how much profit will be made from that Subway sandwich. I think the future for us is very bright, and we have a moment that's open right now for us to build that kind of a movement. And with that, we'd be able to build a society that's based on abundance for all. So solidarity.
Thank you, Maxine. I meant to announce earlier, both Jason and Maxine are members of Organized Workers for Labor Solidarity, and their next meeting, I believe, is Tuesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. in the Labor Temple, Hall 6. So see in Max or Jason if you want more information.